So now you don't need the sermon, right? Well, I don't know. Let's see. What with the stalled political situation, the bullying of democracy by the rich and the corporate, the gyrations of the stock market, what feels like increasing instability and insecurity and downward mobility all around us, well, I don't know about you, but that does affect my mood. I try to hang on to what is hopeful. Don't ask, don't tell has ended. There's a very interesting Occupy Wall Street movement developing. I can still keep my son on our health insurance plan, and it really is wonderful to be your minister. And my garden continued to produce, at least until Friday, a product of global warming. But I know, hey, you take the good where you can get it, right? If you don't feel cheerfully happy at the moment, maybe the immediate situation has you down, or maybe you're a person whose happiness set point is low. That's a biologically based, mostly genetically determined thing. They know that identical twins who weren't raised together or who were raised together but are now living very different lives as adults, one has a good marriage and the other doesn't, for instance, or one is wealthier than the other, or one has a chronic disability from an accident while their twin is still healthy. Those sets of twins actually report enough similarity in their happiness level that we know that happiness has a genetic component. And of course, all of our happiness level is biological. It's all a matter of chemicals and electricity in our brains. The miracle is that we, the whole person, can decide to take actions which have an effect on that chemistry, both temporary and permanent. Our brains are malleable. They have evolved to change, and every single experience we have molds them. Science is beginning to understand how this works with imaging processes and other kinds of research, but Buddhists have been doing empirical research for, these thousands of years. And it turns out that the two bodies of knowledge are very compatible. Perhaps in some other sermon I'll talk about what science knows about happiness. Today we're going to talk about the wisdom of the Buddhists. We look to insights in all the world's religions. But before we start, as they say in the talk shows, let me just say that this isn't a substitute for a professional consultation. Depression is a serious illness, for which a combination of talk therapy and medication does work. If your mood stays low too long, or your thoughts edge into dangerous territory, a sermon is not enough. Also, before we get to the insights of Buddhism, let me remark that Buddhism's focus on happiness is rather unique in the ways of humanity. Our Greek ancestors believed that happiness was mostly a matter of luck and fate, and you will remember how obsessed they were with the idea that anybody could be brought down by fate. Their focus was on being good, not on feeling good. Judaism is similar, although once you are being good, you are allowed, commanded even, to enjoy the bounty of God's world. Christianity has traditionally taught that we are put on this earth to earn our salvation, that is to say, our happiness in the next life. Its happiness, therefore, is considered a goal of our lives, but not something we expect to experience in this life. Our modern ideas about happiness are actually an invention of the Enlightenment here in the West. When in 1776 Americans' founding fathers declared the pursuit of happiness to be one of our unalienable rights, along with life and liberty, they were making a theological statement as much as a political one. However, it must be said that the word pursuit did not mean to them chase, like it does today. Rather, it meant practice. So life, liberty, and the practice of happiness has a little bit different ring to it, doesn't it? The Enlightenment ideas about the proper practice of happiness revolved around things like hard work, saving for the future, learning, serving, and so on. And as to Buddhism, you might be interested in knowing that there is no such word as Buddhism in the East. That's a Western word. In the East, they speak of the Buddha Dharma, or the path of the Buddha. Buddhism is about what you do, not really about what you believe. I know you wouldn't let the trappings of religion get in the way of your consideration of some new ideas, but just so you know, Buddhism is very open to that. The man we call Buddha was born Siddhartha Gautama. Buddha is a title. It means the enlightened one. That's one of his names or titles. Another one you'll be interested in knowing is Sugata, the happy one. Isn't it interesting that here in the West we don't know Siddhartha Gautama by that name? The happy enlightened one's sole aim was to end human suffering. But his words and insights had no impact on the amount of death in the world. That comes one to a customer, no matter how wise they are. Illness, poverty, conflict, all these things which cause unhappiness are part of human life everywhere. Buddha's profound teaching was this: it's possible to be happy anyway. From the very beginning, Buddhism has taught that happiness is available to everyone, all the time, in this life. From the clues that the happy enlightened one left comes the Buddha Dharma, the teachings, the technology, the techniques that help us all become available to that happiness, which is possible to all of us all the time. There's more to Buddhist practice than we can talk about in 20 minutes, so I'm going to focus on two insights. First, we experience happiness only when we live in the present. Secondly, we increase our happiness by dealing skillfully with our unhappiness. Probably the most important insight of Buddhism is that happiness is only available right now. After all, the past is over, and the future not yet here. We Westerners believe that we can be happy by dwelling in the past. That's one of the reasons we're so obsessed by taking pictures. But when we're remembering something lovely from our past, we are actually in the present remembering. If we are aware that we are in the present remembering, we can increase our happiness by focusing on good memories. Being captured by our memories is not so good. That's called nostalgia. It's a lostness, which usually has to idealize the past and is sad that it's gone rather than happy that it was. This is not happiness. And when we're captured by bad memories, we have most often lost ourselves and any awareness we might have of the goodness of our lives. Of course, there's a place for mining the pain of the past, for insights and for healing, but when we do that, we do it knowing we do it, not lost in a morass of bad feeling, but rather from the vantage point of the present, a present available to us because we did survive that past. More insidiously, we believe and we are taught in this culture that we will have the most happiness in this life by working for things in the future which we hope will make us happy. A house, a spouse, a promotion, or in the Christian tradition, so powerful even in our diverse nation, for salvation after death. Since I don't know what happens to us after death, I'm going to follow the wisdom of the Buddha and stay in the present. And the thing about the present is that if we don't know how to be present and happy in the present, we will not know how to be happy in the future with that house or spouse or promotion. As the Buddhists say, you can't enjoy tomorrow's glass of water because you don't have it yet. And if you can't enjoy today's glass of water, you won't enjoy tomorrow's either. This is not to say that we shouldn't plan prudently for the future or even make sacrifices for the future. It is to say that our happiness is now. At our stage in our lives, my husband and I are thinking more about our savings. Previously, we've saved money because it was the prudent thing to do. Wise young people save for their retirement and old age, right? That's what they told me when I started this career. But the time comes when old age and retirement starts to take on a new reality, and one gets out the calculator And suddenly what the balance sheet says and stock market does matter in a whole new way. I know many of you have been there or are there now. And you know, too, how tempting it is to become totally miserable with the thought that 30 years from now I'm going to be miserable because what has happened to the stock market today or this year or this era. Now, when I'm being active with my spreadsheets and my calculator, I am being in the present moment, working away. But when I get clutched up by fear and anxiety and visions of nursing wards worthy of a Dickens novel, when I let that cloud follow me to dinner or foist it on my coworkers the next day, this is not happiness. What a foolish way to spend my one wild and precious life, miserable about what might happen 30 years hence. Furthermore, allowing myself to stay hijacked like that makes it all the more likely that I will be miserable during whatever is left of the rest of my life, even if I have all the money I would ever need. That's right. Our brain takes every bit of our experience in the present moment and builds neural pathways around it. Misery and stress and unhappiness just set the preferred pathways for more misery and stress and unhappiness. And if you've never known a person whose habits of stress, meanness, and fearfulness set the stage for a miserable old age, well then, story and literature are replete with them. It really is literally, chemically true that we have to learn to be happy in the present moment to build our happiness for the future. Our brain naturally builds neural pathways based on our experience, but it starts with a bias of its own, and that bias is negative. Evolution has equipped our brains all too well to continually scan the trees for the saber-toothed tigers, the path ahead for the snakes, the future for dangers to our children. All those anxious activities are very natural, and they probably give us evolutionary advantage. But evolution only cares about the survival of our genes. Evolution does not need us to be happy. If we want happiness, we have to counter some of that genetic inheritance. And being conscious beings, this is something that we can do. Some people can do the work of learning to live in the present moment just by keeping at it in their daily lives. Smile 6 times a day, breathe deeply, all those kinds of things. And whenever they find themselves hijacked into the past or the future, they can bring themselves back into the present in the midst of the dinners and the meetings and the conversations with children. I use that word hijacked on purpose. Legitimate planning and fruitful ruminating is an intentional foray into the past or the future. Both of those can be useful. Hijacked means taken against your will, somewhere you didn't really want to go. Last week, like many of you, I would like to hope all of you, I voted. And unexpectedly in an off-year election, as you no doubt know, the lines were very long. Very long. And so for a time, and I was not alone in this, I noticed, I was downright hijacked. Angry at this system, this symptom of inept government, citizen unwillingness to pay taxes for the things we all want and need, the end of democracy as we know it, and the downfall of all good things. Well, I know you know what I'm talking about, right? 10 minutes of misery in my one wild and precious life. What a waste. The hallways of Sandia High School are a bit dreary, it is true, but they are not nearly as miserable as the end of democracy and the downfall of all good things. I was glad to come to my senses, back to the present. Curses, I thought, foiled again. I recognize the symptoms of hijacking so well because I have learned that in meditation. My own experience was that I couldn't learn to avoid hijacking in the daily hubbub of my life. Everything I've learned about avoiding hijacking, I learned in Buddhist meditation class. Buddhists say that the task of meditation is simply the task of finding happiness in the present moment. and learning enough about what hijacks us and how to manage ourselves in a hijacking that we have the skills to stay in the present moment in our lives. So you sit, settled into a peaceful breathing pattern, relaxed and alert, perhaps using a tool like breathe in peace, breathe out love, and you enjoy the present moment until, and you don't usually have to wait very long, until you suddenly realize you've been hijacked, worrying about the future, thinking up a fine retort, remembering the car that almost hit you, writing your sermon. Oops, you think, don't have to do any of that right now. Back to the present, back to sitting, enjoying the view, breathing in peace, breathing out love. And you do that for 20 minutes, over and over again, bringing yourself back, noticing where you've been, understanding the patterns, breathing in peace, breathing out love. Oops, hijacked again. Keeps on going. And then you start to notice that you can do the same thing in your daily life. You've strengthened some neural pathways. You know where to go when you need to stay in the present moment. Eventually you get so you can go there even in extreme circumstances when you have every reason to be anxious but don't want to dwell there. Now the music teachers in the room may disagree, but I think it's possible to be a fine musician who never practices scales. Scales, after all, come in the normal course of musical events. Some people can probably manage to get them on the fly. But the wisdom of the world's music teachers is very clear on this point. In the long run, the easiest way to become a fluent musician is to spend some time practicing your scales. The world's experts on happiness, the Buddhists, say that the easiest way to become a happy person is to spend some time practicing happiness, which is to say, practicing simply being present to what is in its most basic form, me, sitting here, relaxed, breathing in peace, breathing out love. Find happiness, then, by learning against the brain's inclination to be in the present moment, not scanning the trees. That's the first key to happiness. And the second key to keep it to happiness is keeping happiness when you're unhappy. Because unhappy things happen, right? There was, for instance, that voting line. Even without getting hijacked by my fears for the death of democracy, I was not glad to be standing in that line when I had planned to be cooking dinner. Behind me in line, when I finally got out of that hijacked state and started paying attention to what was going on around me, behind me in my line was a little elderly lady who was saying things like this, clearly for the benefit of all of us. Well, you know, in many countries, they don't get to vote at all. And in lots of places, they stand in line much longer than this, and out in the sun, too. And, well, we just have to cut the cost of government, and we all have to do our part. And, here comes another voting machine. That should help. And miraculously, nobody growled at her. Maybe because the line did start to move along about this time. And presently, we all came abreast of a poster on the wall about tutoring for the ACT test. This was high school, remember? And I heard her say to her heretofore silent husband, "Well, will you look at that? Ina Miller is still tutoring." And since Ina Miller is a member of this church, I asked her how she knew Ina. And then, from then on until we got our ballots, she regaled me quite cheerfully with a tale of difficulty with her son years and years ago, which had resulted in his requiring tutoring from Ina, who helped him recover from the errors of his teenaged ways and get on the path to college. It was really a rather harrowing story, actually, and that told me that this woman's ability to stay happy in a long voting line had been developed in adverse circumstances. She probably wasn't a Buddhist, but she did have the moves down. She took a situation that was making all the voters of Albuquerque unhappy and decided she wasn't going there. She applied a variety of techniques. She used her rational mind, recalling that voting is a privilege for which the price was really quite low, to quiet her irritation and ours. that our plans for this hour had been altered. She noticed her surroundings with pleasure, and she showed every evidence of being completely in the moment as she told us her life's story. She found things to be happy about. Because I was working on this sermon, I was extra aware of this and also of one further important technique for staying happy when you're unhappy, which she didn't evidence, and that is to honor our unhappiness. Seems a little paradoxical, doesn't it, to be happy by honoring unhappiness, but it works, especially if you go about it carefully. You see, happiness requires us to stay in the present moment, and there are moments in which we are unhappy. That unhappiness is a real part of the present moment, just like the warm sun and the pleasure of taking our next breath. Therefore, we notice it and honor it along with the rest. Think of it this way. If you're the parent of a 4-year-old child and that child falls and starts to cry, the happiness of the room is disturbed. Now, you, the adult, can tell that this was no serious spill. You see no blood, but your child is wailing. And the way to get happiness back in the room most quickly is not to say, "Shh, you're not really hurt." You know what'll happen. He'll just cry louder to prove you wrong. Anyway, damaged flesh or not, the child is hurt, if only his pride. That's why he's crying. So the fastest way to restore happiness in the room is to say, "Oh, sweetie, you fell. Come and show me where it hurts. Right there. Oh, shall I rub it, or would you like to rub it? And what were you doing when you fell? Oh, chasing the cat. Oh, that elusive cat. You would really like to catch that cat, wouldn't you? But maybe it would be more fun to play with your stuffed cat who won't run away. Yes? Okay, off you go." Right? This is the kind of parental conversation which is good in many ways, and it also restores happiness. We can learn to treat our own pains in that same gentle way, and thereby restore happiness in the room of our being. Ah, Christine, worrying about the future again. And yes, of course, it is possible that this long line at the voting booth is a symptom of the death of democracy. What a terrible thought. Nothing to be done about it right now, though, except to go on with voting. So a bit boring, yes, so why not ask this lady who just mentioned Dinah Miller's name how it is that she happens to know her? Aren't I wise? The Buddhists say that we all deserve compassion, and our own compassion for ourselves most of all. And I learned from my son that much of the time he was upset about something, what he really needed was just to be noticed, whatever his upset was, that named. Not only is this a bit of love, and how can that hurt, whether directed to someone else or ourselves, but the very act of naming separates us into the neighbor and the named. When Mommy asks where the hurt is, some part of me that is not hurt answers. And I get to choose how to deal with this. Should I rub it, or should I ask Mommy to rub it? Either way, I have my eye back. I'm not a lump of fallen hurtingness anymore. I'm a little boy who chases cats unsuccessfully, but who does have a stuffed cat who does my every bidding. And off I go, back into the present moment. When we notice and name the fact that we've been hijacked by anxiety, we give some love to a less skillful part of ourselves. How can that hurt? And we remind ourselves just by doing that we are more than our anxieties. Oh yes, we are a person who makes choices, who wants to experience happiness in the present. Furthermore, we are a person who practices compassion for the less skillful parts of herself, which in turn helps her develop compassion for others. And compassion for others, along with generosity, simplicity, and knowing yourself, the world's religions tell us that these are all the keys to happiness. The Buddhists, who've worked at this the hardest over the ages, tell us clearly, the way we end our suffering and find happiness is to learn to find the present moment, because that's where happiness dwells.